Joel Hartwell signed the admission form at 11:47 p.m. on a Tuesday in October. Not his own admission. His wife's. The nurse handed him the clipboard with both hands, the way people do when they understand the weight of what they are passing along. Joel took it with one. He signed where the pen was pointing, handed it back, and walked out of Crestline Medical Center without asking a single question about what happened next. He did not ask about the surgery. He did not ask about the bleeding. He did not ask whether she was stable, or critical, or somewhere in between that was harder to name. He walked through the automatic doors, stood in the parking lot for 30 seconds, and then got in his car and drove home. The nurse's station logged his departure at 11:52 p.m. 5 minutes. That was how long Joel Hartwell stayed after his wife was rushed into emergency surgery following a head-on collision on Route 9, a collision that left her car unrecognizable, and left Vivian with internal bleeding, a shattered collarbone, and something else. Something neither of them knew yet. Something that would not survive the night. He did not know about that last part. He never would. Because Joel Hartwell never called back. Before this story unfolds, stay with it. Not just for what happens, but for what it reveals. Because the most devastating betrayals are rarely the loud ones. Sometimes the cruelest thing a person can do is simply choose not to pick up the phone. If you are watching from anywhere in the world right now, drop your location in the comments. And if you believe that the truth always finds its way to the surface, even when someone tried to bury it, consider subscribing. Not for noise. For stories that remember. To understand why a man walks away from a hospital at midnight and keeps walking for 7 months, you have to understand what he told himself when he left. And what he chose to keep telling himself, long after the evidence said otherwise. Joel and Vivian Hartwell had been married for 4 years when the accident happened. On the surface, it looked like most marriages that have quietly begun to come apart. Less conversation. More routine. The kind of distance that does not announce itself, it simply accumulates, the way dust does, until one morning you notice it everywhere and cannot remember the last time it was not there. Joel had convinced himself the distance was mutual. That what they had was already more architecture than feeling, more habit than love. He told himself this often enough that it became the version he lived inside. What he did not tell himself was the truth. That he had already been seeing someone else for 3 months. That her name was Hallie Crane. That she was 31, worked in marketing, and believed every word Joel said, because Joel had always been very good at being believed. He had not told Hallie he was married. He had told her instead that he was separated. That the paperwork was a formality. That his wife and he had understood for over a year that it was finished. These were not the words of a man planning to leave. They were the words of a man who had already decided, but had not yet been forced to act. The accident forced him. Or rather, what he chose to do after the accident forced him. Joel drove home that night and sat in the kitchen for 2 hours. He told himself Vivian was in good hands. That hospitals existed for exactly this. That there was nothing he could do sitting in a waiting room that the doctors could not do better without him there. These were the things people say when they are dressing up a decision they have already made, in language that makes it sound almost reasonable. He went to bed at 2 in the morning. At 3:14 a.m., his phone rang. Crestline Medical Center. He looked at the screen. He let it ring. At 3:31 a.m., it rang again. Same number. He turned the phone face down on the nightstand. At 4:09 a.m., a voicemail arrived. He did not listen to it. By morning, he had built an explanation that satisfied him. The surgery had either gone well or it had not. If it had gone well, they would call with an update. If it had not, they would call with something worse. Either way, the call would come and he could deal with it then. The call did not come again. Not that day. Not the next. He waited 2 more days before he allowed himself to interpret the silence. And the interpretation he chose was the one that cost him nothing emotionally, and everything else. He decided she had not made it. That the silence was the hospital's way of saying there was no longer anyone to update him about. That Vivian was gone. He chose to believe this, not because it was supported by evidence, but because it was convenient. Because it meant he did not have to call. Did not have to go back. Did not have to look at what he had done in that parking lot at 11:52 p.m. and call it by its real name. So Joel Hartwell buried his wife in his mind. Moved her from the present tense into the past. And within 3 weeks, he had taken Hallie to dinner and told her, quietly, with the right amount of visible pain and the right amount controlled, that he had lost his wife in an accident. That he was trying to find his way forward. Hallie reached across the table and held his hand. She believed every word. She had no reason not to. Joel said it the way people say true things. He had rehearsed it just enough that it no longer felt like performance, even to him. He had stood in front of the bathroom mirror 2 nights before that dinner and practiced the grief. The pause before answering. The slight tightening in the jaw. The breath taken before saying her name. He had practiced it. While Vivian was still alive. What neither of them knew, what Joel had chosen not to know, was that on the other side of the city, in a private room on the 4th floor of Crestline Medical Center, Vivian Hartwell was still breathing. She had been breathing the whole time. The surgery had taken 6 hours. Her collarbone had been rebuilt. The internal bleeding had been stopped. She had been sedated for 4 days and unconscious for 2 more after that. When she finally opened her eyes on the 6th morning, the first thing she saw was a ceiling she did not immediately recognize. The second thing she saw was the chair beside her bed. Empty. She stared at it for a long time. Her body was registering pain in an organized, distant way, the way the body reports damage when the mind is still catching up. The room was quiet, and clean, and deliberately warm in its light. But the chair beside her bed was empty. Audrey Wells, the charge nurse on duty, came in within minutes of the monitors registering Vivian's return to consciousness. She moved efficiently, checking vitals, adjusting me4, noting responses. Her hands were steady. Her face was composed. But her eyes, briefly, just briefly, went to the empty chair. Vivian noticed. "How long?" Vivian asked. Her voice was barely there. Rough from the tube, from the days of silence. 6 days, Audrey said. Vivian looked at the chair again. "You called him," she said. Not a question. Audrey's hand stilled for just a moment on the chart. "Yes," she said carefully. Vivian turned her head slightly toward her. "How many times?" The room went very quiet. Audrey did not answer immediately. She finished the notation she was making. She set the chart down. Then she looked at Vivian with the particular expression of someone who refuses to insult another person with a comfortable lie. "Enough," she said. That single word landed in the room like a stone dropped into still water. Vivian looked back at the ceiling. She did not cry. She did not close her eyes. She simply lay there and held the weight of it, the weight of that one word, and everything it confirmed. Then, slowly, she brought her right hand up and rested it on her stomach. She did not know yet. But her hand went there first, before the words came, before anyone said anything at all. As if her body understood something her mind was still being protected from. She lay with her hand there for a long time. Audrey saw it. She said nothing. She stayed in the room longer than the vitals check required, straightening things that did not need straightening, remaining present in the only way that was available to her. Because someone needed to be present. It was Mackenzie Holt, the hospital's director of patient services, who eventually told her. Not immediately, not until Vivian was stable enough to hear it, and strong enough to survive the hearing. Mackenzie said it plainly, because Vivian was not a woman who was served by softness dressed up as truth. Vivian had been 3 months pregnant. She had not yet told Joel. She had been waiting for the right moment, the kind that kept not arriving in a marriage that had stopped producing them. She had been carrying it alone, quietly, with a private hope she had not yet allowed herself to name out loud. She lost the baby during surgery. Trauma complications. There had been no choice, and no chance. Vivian heard this lying flat on her back, her left arm in a brace, her husband's chair empty beside her. She did not cry immediately. She moved her right hand back to her stomach. She held it there. And in the silence that followed, in the space between Mackenzie finishing the sentence and anything else being said, Vivian grieved two things at once. The child. And the moment she had been protecting. The dinner she had planned. The careful sentence she had rehearsed. The look she had imagined on his face when she finally told him. All of it, gone. In a room he had never come back to. Mackenzie sat with her through all of it. She did not speak. She did not try to fill the silence with comfort that would not hold. She simply remained, which was the only useful thing available, and the thing Vivian needed most. Later, when Vivian finally asked about Joel, her voice flat, her eyes dry, Mackenzie answered honestly. He had signed the paperwork. He had left. He had not returned, and had not called. Vivian closed her eyes. When she opened them again, something had shifted. Not visibly. Not dramatically. But Mackenzie, who had spent over a decade watching people navigate the worst moments of their lives, recognized it immediately. It was the stillness of someone who has just made a decision so complete that nothing outside it matters anymore. What Vivian did not tell Mackenzie that morning was who she was. Not because it was a secret. Because it had never seemed relevant in the way people assume wealth is always relevant. Her full name was Vivian Adele Wren before she became Vivian Hartwell. Her grandfather had been Edmund Wren. And Edmund Wren had built what eventually became the Wren Health Group, a private hospital network with 4 facilities across 2 states, of which Crestline Medical Center was the flagship. Vivian had inherited controlling interest 2 years ago, when her mother died. She had never mentioned this to Joel. Not out of deception, but out of an instinct her family had carried for 3 generations. You did not lead with the weight of what you owned. You learned first whether the person across from you was worth knowing. And by the time Vivian understood that Joel Hartwell was not, it no longer seemed relevant to correct the record. She lay in a room inside a building she controlled, recovering from injuries sustained in an accident her husband had walked away from, grieving a child her husband had never known existed, and she said none of this out loud for 11 days. On the 12th day, Desmond Hale arrived. Desmond had been Vivian's attorney for 6 years. He was the kind of lawyer who did not speak until the words had been arranged in exactly the right order, and who understood that his client's silences carried as much instruction as her sentences. He arrived with a leather briefcase, sat across from her in the visitor's chair, and did not open the briefcase immediately. He waited for her to begin. She told him what she needed. Not what she felt. Not what had happened in full detail. Just the structure of what came next. Clean. Sequential. Without gaps. Desmond listened without interrupting. When she finished, he opened the briefcase, removed a single folder, and placed it on the bed beside her. She signed it. The process had already begun. Vivian spent 6 weeks at Crestline recovering, longer than medically necessary, but useful in other ways. She reviewed documents from the bed. She held calls with the Wren Group's administrative board from the 4th floor window seat once she was mobile enough to sit upright. She asked Mackenzie to ensure her presence in the building remained handled with discretion. Mackenzie managed this without being asked twice. Audrey continued her rounds with the same professional composure she always maintained. But she began stopping by Vivian's room at the end of each shift, not for medical reasons. Just to check. Just to remain present in the small way that sometimes means more than the large ones. Vivian noticed. She did not comment. But she noticed. Meanwhile, across the city, Joel Hartwell was living inside the story he had constructed, and the story was holding. He and Hallie had moved from careful to committed. She had met his friends. He had met hers. They had settled into the particular ease of 2 people who believe they are building something real because no one has yet told them what they are actually standing on. Joel's company, Hartwell Supply Solutions, had spent the last 8 months pursuing a contract with a private hospital network. Regional. Significant enough that losing it would require restructuring, and winning it would change the trajectory of the next 5 years. His business partner, Tristan Mercer, had told him 3 weeks before the conference that the Wren Group was different. That the decision-maker was not a committee. That there was a single point of authority, and that point had recently become more active following what the industry described vaguely as a period of transition. Joel had nodded and moved on to other agenda items. He was not a man who prepared by listening. He was a man who prepared by believing he was already prepared. The conference was held at the Alderton Hotel on a Thursday in May. A regional healthcare operations summit. Joel arrived with Tristan and 2 members of their operations team, collected his badge at the registration table, and moved toward the main hall. Tristan stopped walking before they reached the door. Joel turned. Tristan was staring at the printed program in his hand, and his expression had shifted in a way Joel could not immediately read. "What?" Joel said. "The Wren Group lead," Tristan said carefully. "It changed." Joel waited. Tristan turned the program toward him. Listed under the Wren Health Group, below the name of the network and the session time, was a single name. Vivian Wren Hartwell. Executive Director. Joel read it twice. The second time, something moved across his face that he could not manage fast enough for Tristan not to see. Something unguarded. Something that crossed his features in the space between reading and recovering. "That's your," Tristan started. "She's supposed to be," Joel started at the same moment. Neither of them finished. Tristan stared at the program, then back at Joel, his expression carrying several questions, none of them asked yet. Joel took the program from Tristan's hand. Looked at it one more time. Handed it back. "Let's go in," he said. "Joel." "I know," Joel said. He walked through the door. He saw her before she saw him. Vivian was standing at the far end of the hall near the platform, speaking with 2 people Joel did not recognize. Dark blue blazer. Hair pulled back the way she wore it when she was working. Her left arm moved slightly differently than it used to, barely perceptible, the kind of thing you would only notice if you had once known the way she moved well enough to measure the difference. She looked composed. Not in the careful way of someone maintaining composure, but in the settled way of someone who no longer requires effort to be still. Joel stood at the entrance for seconds longer than he intended to. Then Vivian turned. She did not react. She looked at him across the length of the room the way you look at something you have already processed so completely that its appearance requires no adjustment. No sharp intake of breath. No visible shift. No break in her expression. She simply looked at him. And then she turned back to the conversation she had been having. That was it. Joel felt something move through him that he could not name precisely. Not guilt in any clean form. Not relief. The specific, disorienting sensation of realizing that the version of events you have been living inside was not the version that was actually occurring. Vivian had not died. Vivian had recovered. Vivian was standing 30 feet away from him in a room where she held deciding authority over a contract his company could not afford to lose. And she had looked at him and turned away. That last part was the part that took up the most space. Their scheduled session with the Wren Group was 4th on the afternoon block. The breakout room was small, a rectangular table, 8 chairs, a screen at the far end. When Joel and Tristan arrived, Desmond Hale was already seated, along with 2 members of the Wren administrative team. Vivian was not yet in the room. Tristan opened the preliminary materials. Joel took his seat and arranged his folder in front of him and looked at the door. Vivian entered 4 minutes later. She walked to the head of the table, placed her leather portfolio in front of her chair, and sat down. She looked briefly at her team, then at Tristan, then at Joel. She held his gaze for exactly as long as was professionally appropriate. Not a second longer. Tristan began the introduction. Ms. Wren, "Thank you for Mrs. Hartwell will do," Vivian said, without looking up from her materials. Still legally accurate. The sentence landed in the room quietly. Tristan absorbed it without reaction. Desmond did not react at all, he had written the terms of it. Joel's jaw tightened once. Then it did not move again. Vivian looked up and addressed the table. "We have 40 minutes. First 20 on supply chain documentation, the second on service terms. Questions at the end, if anything requires clarification." Her tone was the one she used when the meeting had already been decided in her mind and what remained was simply the formality of moving through it correctly. Tristan presented. His case was strong, clear, well-structured. Joel spoke when it was his turn, made it sound inevitable, made it sound like the obvious choice. His voice held. His answers were accurate. He had walked into difficult rooms before and walked out of them with what he came for. He told himself this was no different. For 23 minutes, it almost was not. Vivian listened. She made notes. She asked questions that were precise and structural and gave nothing away. The meeting moved forward the way competent meetings do, efficiently, without drama, toward what seemed like a conclusion that might actually favor them. Joel began to believe they were going to be fine. That was exactly when Tristan spoke. He said it the way people say things that seem harmless right up until the moment they land, offered as a human detail, a point of credibility, something to soften the professional distance. "Joel has had a difficult personal year," Tristan said. "He lost his wife last year. In an accident. We're all glad to see him bringing this kind of focus back to the table." The room went still. Vivian stopped writing. She did not look at Tristan immediately. She finished the word she had been noting, deliberately, without haste. The pen moved to its period. Then she set it down and looked up. "I'm sorry," she said. Perfectly calm. "Could you say that again?" Tristan repeated it. Carefully. "Joel lost his wife last year. In an accident." Vivian held his gaze for one measured moment. Then she said, quietly, without blinking, without a single fracture in her composure, "That must have been very difficult for him." A pause. Just long enough for everyone in the room to lean in without realizing they had. "I was in recovery at the time." The silence that followed was not like other silences. It had mass. It had temperature. It pressed against every person at that table with a weight that could not be explained by the words alone, only by what the words contained. Desmond looked at his notes. The two Wren administrators glanced at each other, once, briefly, then away. Tristan looked at Joel. Joel did not move. He sat completely still, his hands flat on the table, his face doing the thing that faces do when the person wearing them has run out of the resources required to manage them. 7 months of constructed narrative. 7 months of practiced grief, of rehearsed pauses, of a story told so many times it had begun to feel like memory. All of it, suspended. In 8 words. And still, nobody moved to end the meeting. Nobody stood. Nobody said the thing that was now sitting in the center of the room. They simply remained in their seats, held in place by the particular gravity of a truth that has just been spoken in public for the first time. It was Vivian who broke it. She picked up her pen. She returned to her portfolio. Her voice, when it came, was exactly what it had been before Tristan's sentence, even, forward-moving, without ornamentation. "Shall we continue?" she said. They continued. The 40 minutes ended on schedule. Vivian closed her portfolio, thanked the room, and stood. As the others moved toward the door, Joel stood too. "Vivian," he said. She stopped. She did not turn immediately. When she did, her expression was the same as it had been throughout, even. Unreadable in the specific way of someone who has already read everything and arrived at the end of it. "A moment," Joel said. "If you have one." Desmond paused near the door and looked at Vivian. A small look, a question without words. Vivian gave a slight nod. Desmond left and closed the door behind him. The room was very quiet now. Joel stood on one side of the table. Vivian stood on the other. The distance between them was measured in feet, and also in things that had no unit of measurement, but occupied more space than the room could hold. "I thought," he started. "I know what you thought," Vivian said. "Not cold. Not warm." The voice of someone who has processed something so completely, it no longer produces heat. Joel stopped. "I waited for you to call back," she said. "The first night. And the second." A pause. "By the third, I understood that you weren't going to." He opened his mouth. "I'm not asking you to explain it," she said. "I already understand it. I understood it before I was well enough to sit up on my own." Joel closed his mouth. Vivian looked at him without accusation, without visible anger. What he saw in her face was something harder to navigate than anger. Completion. The expression of someone who finished a book a long time ago and is now simply holding it, waiting for the other person to catch up to the last page. "There were things I didn't tell you," she said. "About who I am. About what I carry. I made a choice about timing, and the timing ran out. That part is on me." She held his gaze. "But I want you to hear something. Not for closure, I don't need that from you. I just need it said out loud, once, so it exists somewhere outside of me." Joel stood still. "I lost the baby," Vivian said. "During surgery. I was 3 months along." "You didn't know?" She did not look away. "I hadn't told you yet." The sentence landed. Joel's face did something he could not control. Something real moved across it, something that had nothing to do with the version of himself he had been managing for 7 months. His mouth opened slightly. His eyes changed. Vivian watched it happen. She let the silence hold for 10 full seconds, long enough to mean something. Not long enough to become something she had to carry. Then she picked up her portfolio. "I'll have Desmond send the contract decision by end of week," she said. "Based on the merits of the proposal. Nothing else." She walked toward the door. Vivian. Her name, this time, had a different texture. Less composed. More like something escaping than something said. She stopped at the door with her hand on the frame. She did not turn around. "You didn't leave me because I died, Joel," she said quietly. "You let me die because you had already left." She walked out. Joel stood alone in the conference room for a long time. The door had been left slightly open and the sounds of the hotel hallway moved through it steadily, other sessions ending, people talking, the ordinary movement of a world that continued without adjustment for what had just occurred inside this room. He was thinking about a phone that rang at 3:14 in the morning. About a screen he looked at and chose to turn face down. About a bathroom mirror and a rehearsed pause and a dinner table and a woman who believed him because he had decided that being believed mattered more than being honest. He was thinking about a hand resting on a stomach. About a child who had not survived the night. About a moment Vivian had been protecting, the dinner, a sentence, a look she had imagined on his face, that he had never been present enough to receive, and never would be. Tristan found him still standing there 6 minutes later. He came in quietly and stood beside him and said nothing for a long moment. "Then, you okay?" Joel said, "No." Tristan nodded slowly. "All right," he said. That was all. They both understood it was the only honest answer left. They walked out together. The contract decision arrived by email 4 days later. The Wren Health Group had elected to move forward with Hartwell Supply Solutions for the regional distribution contract, pending final documentation review. Tristan read it twice. Then he walked into Joel's office and set his laptop on the desk. "We got it," he said. Joel looked at the screen. He read it once. He should have felt everything he had spent 8 months working toward: relief, momentum, confirmation that the effort had been worth it. Instead he sat back in his chair and looked at the screen with an expression Tristan could not read and eventually stopped trying to. She said it would be based on the merits, Joel said quietly. Not to Tristan. More like something said to the room itself. To the version of himself that had believed he could walk into that conference hall and walk back out without consequence. She had been better than him. Not just at business. At being a person. Tristan waited. Joel looked up. Good, he said. Let's get the documentation ready. He turned back to his desk. Hallie found out on a Saturday morning, not from Joel, but from a tablet screen and an industry newsletter. She was reading a recap of the Alderton Summit when she came across a mention of the Wren Group's new executive presence at regional conferences, and the name attached to it. Vivian Wren Hartwell. She read the name once. She looked it up. She sat very still in the kitchen for 11 minutes. Then Joel came downstairs. He saw her face before he saw the screen. He knew what the face meant before she said a word. She asked him one question. She did not raise her voice. What actually happened in October, she said. Joel sat down. And for the first time, without shaping it, without calibrating it, without the careful management of someone who has rehearsed grief in a bathroom mirror, he told her the truth. The hospital. The clipboard. The parking lot at 11:52 p.m. The phone at 3:14 in the morning and the choice he made not to answer it. The voicemail he never played. The silence he chose to interpret as confirmation. The dinner, 2 weeks later, where he delivered a practiced grief across a table and watched her reach for his hand. He told her all of it. Hallie listened without moving. When he finished, she was quiet for a long time. She was not thinking about Joel. She was thinking about the woman in the coverage photo, Vivian Wren Hartwell, standing at a podium, composed, precisely herself. Alive in the specific way of someone who has come back from something and knows the full distance they have covered. She was thinking about what it costs to walk into a room 7 months later, sit at the head of a table, and conduct a meeting as though the person across from you had not left you for dead. Hallie stood. She placed her coffee cup in the sink, carefully, the way people handle ordinary objects when everything else feels unsteady. Then she looked at Joel. I need time, she said. Joel nodded. She picked up her bag from the chair by the door and left. He sat at the kitchen table for a long time after she was gone. The coffee she had made was still warm. The morning light was ordinary. Everything in the room looked exactly as it always had, and nothing in it felt the way it used to. Across the city, Vivian Wren Hartwell was in her office at the Wren Group's administrative building. Early for a Saturday, but she had never kept conventional hours when something required attention. The light through the windows was the particular quality of May morning light, clean, unhurried, honest about what it touched. She was reviewing the Alderton contracts. The Hartwell file was among them. She read through the terms, confirmed the supply specifications, and initialed the sections requiring her sign-off. She did not pause longer on that file than on any other. When she reached the last page, she signed her name. Full name. Deliberate. The signature of someone who knows exactly what they are putting their name on, and has made a considered choice to do so. She closed the file. She moved to the next. Desmond arrived at 10 with coffee and the week's correspondence. He placed both on the corner of the desk and sat across from her without being invited, because they had known each other long enough for the invitation to be understood. They worked in silence for a while. The kind of silence that exists between two people who have been through something serious together and have come out the other side of it with their respect for each other intact. After a while, Vivian set down her pen. I want to establish the constant Wren Fund this quarter, she said. Desmond looked up. Maternal care, she continued. High-risk pregnancies. Underserved populations. He looked at her the way he sometimes did when she said something that was, on the surface, a business directive, but underneath was something that had been carried for a long time and had finally found its right form. Had the paperwork drawn up, she said. Of course, Desmond said. He wrote the name down carefully. Constance Wren Fund. Then he set his pen down and looked at her for a moment. It's a good name, he said. Vivian looked at the window. At the May light. At the ordinary Saturday moving outside without weight or ceremony. Yes, she said quietly. It is. She returned to her documents. Desmond returned to his. The room held them both in the particular stillness of work that means something, work that is not just forward motion, but the kind that closes a wound properly. That turns grief into something a stranger can one day benefit from without ever knowing the cost of it. Outside, the city continued, indifferent and steady, carrying everyone inside it forward, whether they were ready or not. Inside, Vivian Hartwell kept working. She would fund a maternal care program that would eventually serve over 400 women in its first year alone. Women in high-risk pregnancies. Women in underserved hospitals. Women who would never know her name, or the chair that had been empty beside her bed, or the hand she had placed on her stomach before anyone told her the words that changed everything. They would never know. But the care would reach them. The resources would arrive. The program would exist. Because Vivian had decided, in a hospital room, in the dark, with no one beside her, that the only answer to a grief that large was to build something larger still. That is not a story about what was lost. It is a story about what was built in the absence of the person who should have been there to witness it. About the kind of strength that does not ask for an audience, that shows up before anyone is watching and continues long after everyone has stopped. About a woman who recovered in a room by herself and came out of it not colder, but clearer. Not harder, but more precisely herself. About what it looks like when a person decides that the life continuing forward is worth more than the explanation of everything that tried to stop it. Joel Hartwell was not a villain in the way that stories require villains. He was something more ordinary, and in some ways more troubling. A man who had consistently chosen the comfortable interpretation when the harder one was available. Who had dressed avoidance in the language of acceptance. Who had built a new life on a grave that turned out to be empty, and had not examined what that said about him until the woman he had buried was running the meeting. Some reckonings do not arrive loudly. They do not come with raised voices, or slamming doors, or the particular drama that stories teach us to expect. Sometimes they arrive in a signed contract. In a name on a portfolio. In a sentence said quietly at a door, without turning around. You didn't leave me because I died, Joel. You let me die, because you had already left. It was the smallest sentence in the room. It was also the only one that could not be put down. Vivian Hartwell drove home that Saturday evening as the light was leaving. She parked in the driveway of the house she had moved into 6 months ago, the one that had nothing in it from before, filled slowly and deliberately with things she had chosen for herself. She sat in the car for a moment before going in. Not in grief. Not in anger. In the quiet kind of accounting that has no drama attached to it. She thought about Audrey Wells, who had stopped by her room at the end of every shift for 6 weeks, without being asked, without announcement, without expectation of anything in return. She thought about Mackenzie Holt, who had sat beside her bed and said the hard things in the gentlest language available. She thought about Desmond, who had arrived with a briefcase and no unnecessary questions and built what she needed without requiring her to explain why she needed it. She thought about her mother. About the fund that would carry her name. About the women who would move through high-risk pregnancies in rooms where someone was actually present, where the phone was answered, where the chair beside the bed was not empty. She thought about that for a long moment. Then she got out of the car and went inside. She had work in the morning. The week was already full. There were decisions to make, contracts to finalize, a network to run, a fund to establish, and a life to continue living, in the forward direction, which was the only direction it had ever been willing to go. She made dinner. She ate at the kitchen table. She read for an hour before bed. She slept without difficulty. Outside, the city did what cities do. It continued, indifferent and steady, carrying everyone inside it forward, whether they were ready or not. Some of them were ready. Vivian Hartwell was one of them. Kindness is not a small thing. It does not stay where you put it. Neither does dignity, when someone holds it long enough, quietly enough, without asking to be witnessed. It moves. It reaches. It becomes something the world benefits from, long after the moment that forged it has been forgotten by everyone except the person who lived through it. If this story stayed with you, even quietly, let it be heard. A comment, a share, or simply the name of where you are watching from right now. Small things that remind us these stories travel further than we think. And if you believe that what survives us matters more than what hurt us, you already understand why stories like this one need to exist.